We are awakening together. This is our weekly gathering we hold online. For more information, visit our website, awakening-together.org. We'd love to see you there.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Dawn. Happy Sunday. Nice to see everybody here. Hope you all had a peaceful and enjoyable holiday. Want to welcome anybody here directly in the sanctuary, anybody listening on the radio, and then, of course, if you're listening at a future date, saying hi and wishing you well at that time as well. Okay, so now we'll say a prayer. That will be very good for me to get settled. Dear Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for your presence among us. And we ask that you help us prepare for whatever it is that you have for us today in these coming moments. May we turn down the volume of the chatter in our minds and turn up the volume of your voice as it needs to speak to each and every one of us today. Again, I'm so grateful to be able to be here, to share what you've shown me, and to share it with my brothers and my sisters. Love be with us, and so it is. Amen. Okay, and my reader today is going to be Jaquelyn Eckert. Thank you, Jaquelyn, for reading. We're going to read from Way of Mastery, and it is from chapter 22, and I believe the title of the lesson is Self-Honesty, the Greatest Act of Love. And the lessons are pretty big, so I had to chop it down a little bit. So we're going to start with a section called Inner Silence, the Threshold to Wisdom Divine. And Jaquelyn will read that for us. Thank you, Jaquelyn.
Okay. The theme, then, of this lesson is the cultivation of that inner silence, which is the threshold to wisdom divine. How, then, does the mind come to true silence? It is not merely a matter of closing the mouth. It's not simply a matter of shutting out the noise of the world. It is certainly not a matter of ceasing to listen to others, whether they speak the words of praise or words of criticism. Quite to the contrary. Silence can be cultivated in a number of ways. Initially, it will look like something you do through the body, to breathe deeply and rhythmically, to sit next to an ocean, to sit beneath a tree and become absorbed in the wind, or to merely practice the ancient art of remaining silent without speaking as you go through your daily events. All of these begin to cultivate a relaxation within the brain, the nervous system, and the body. Yet these things are merely projections of mind anyway. So to still the body, to calm the body, to allow the activity in the brain hemispheres to relax and become more harmonious is, in fact, an initial step in bringing the mind to silence. But far deeper than these things is this, that genuine silence, which is indeed the threshold to wisdom, and wisdom is nothing more than enlightenment, requires the cultivation of deep self-honesty. Honesty is that act in which the mind is no longer committed to hiding from its own darkness. I have said many times and in many ways that it is necessary to enter into the blackness of the ego in order to discover what you want no longer. In truth, for anyone who makes such a journey, that which the ego is becomes repulsive, repugnant, and hurtful to oneself. And that is the only thing that matters. Therefore, understand that in the way of transformation, although we have covered much territory in these lessons so far, a cornerstone of the universal curriculum must always be the cultivation of a deep self-honesty. In self-honesty, one decides to simply observe the mind itself, to simply observe the behavior that flows from the mind through the body as it gestures itself out into the world. True self-honesty requires time. Why? Because the ego is the attempt to replace honesty and truth with dishonesty and falsity. Imagine for a moment that you are fully enlightened in this moment. You are abiding in a state of perfect freedom and peace. You are at one with God. Would there be anything that you would need to be dishonest with in your own mind? What corner of the mind would you have failed to embrace in light? Therefore, in truth, beloved friends, understand well that the ego is the attempt to replace honesty with dishonesty. It is dishonesty itself. In fact, one could go so far as to say that those who would seek for the devil need look only at the ego, in which case the ego becomes egocentric. Your sense of identity is all wrapped up in defending and protecting a false image of yourself. Much resistance is pervading your human domain, which is only this. No, I will not look honestly. I must uphold the image I need to believe is true about myself. This is not love, and this is not truth. An exercise in self-honesty. Beloved friends, take a moment and simply cultivate deep self-honesty by merely answering these questions. Have I ever had a murderous thought? Have I ever manipulated another mind in order to try to gain what I believed I needed? Have I ever withdrawn love for the subtle reason of causing hurt or trying to cause hurt to another? Have I ever had disrespectful sexual fantasies? Have I ever hated the world? Have I ever despised myself? And last, but surely not least, for in truth, if you would consider it, all of those questions emanate out of this one. Have I ever hated God? In perfect self-honesty, the answer to each of those questions can only be yes. The honest mind looks upon all that has arisen within it without judgment, for there can be no honesty while there is judgment. Think well upon the questions that we have asked you. Then simply take it a step further and ask yourself, has any of that type of thing occurred within my mind recently? Notice what happens now. Pay attention to your mind and even into your body and breath. What occurs as you begin to get closer to the truth? Do you notice a little bit of restlessness, the mind becoming more active with chatter? Decide for silence. Decide for peace. For healing occurs to the depth and degree that the mind is willing to embrace what occurs within it. Denial causes separation, self from self, self from others, and self from God. Therefore, the very peace that the mind seeks through religious belief is impossible as long as the mind is in denial about itself. Rest assured, when I walked upon your planet as a man, I too often became frustrated at the Pharisees who would stand on the corner in their long, beautiful robes, professing religious belief. They had their just reward. This is why I often say, beware of those who come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. For the dishonest mind is in conflict constantly. It splits itself off from its sexuality as a human being. It splits itself off from its anger, its sadness, its hurt, and its murderous thoughts. But the mind that is healed has learned to turn and embrace every subtle shadow within the mind. For love alone embraces all things, trusts all things, allows all things, and thereby transcends all things, and needs no longer live in fear that those things can run it. Enlightenment is a state in which the world, and the world is not outside of you, the world is the context, the thoughts, images, and perceptions that you have attracted to yourself, can no longer hold power over you. It does not mean that it ceases to exist. This has been the great error of religion as opposed to spirituality. Religion will give you a set of beliefs, ideas about yourself, standards that you must achieve. Thereby, the mind concludes that if I am to be a spiritual person, I cannot be angry. If I am a spiritual person, I don't have sexual fantasies about my neighbor. All of that is absolutely false. For in reality, the experience in your domain is one in which the mind has created and is aware of all things, unlike love. It then splits itself off and projects an image called the ego, to itself first, and obviously to others, that it most wants to believe is true. But remember, belief is not knowledge. Knowledge alone allows the mind to observe what arises within it without judgment, without fear, without identifying with it. It looks upon the world in perfect forgiveness and says, I just had a murderous thought. I had a picture of hitting my employer over the head with a sledgehammer and watching the blood spurt through the broken skull. Yes, well, just another thought arising and passing away in this domain. It does not change the truth of who I am, and I am free to extend love or to hit him with a hammer. The mind that is free and at peace is no longer conflicted within itself. The mind that is unconflicted abides in perfect vulnerability. It has learned to embrace and accept the truth about the phenomena of the mind itself in this dream world. It is willing to begin to be honest and to cultivate deeper honesty with everyone around them. No longer is there pretense. No longer is there manipulation or control. There is no unconscious split-off energy actually running the show, even though that mind seems to be oblivious to it. The mind in conflict with itself is dangerous to itself and, of course, by extension, to everyone else in all dimensions. Therefore, indeed, beloved friends, beware of those that come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Beware of the viciousness of the ego within your own mind. How does it come to you in sheep's clothing? Does it minimize hurtful behaviors? Does it minimize what is truly merely a lack of self-responsibility? Does it always make excuses why your life is not progressing in a way of becoming more and more empowered to bring forth Christ? Learn to cultivate self-honesty. Though it sounds like a simple thing, this does take time, simply because the mind has used its own power to be in denial about its own miscreations. It does not want to own them. It does not want to embrace them. It wants very much for you and itself to believe that it is really a very high spiritual being. It will wear the sheep's clothing of the ego, of the persona, the mask, the self-image, the projected image into the social world. And it will cling to that like a robe around the body, held against the cold winter wind, and it will cling to it no matter what. Such a mind is an insane mind, and an insane mind is hurtful. An insane mind limits the flow of love through it that could heal this world. Therefore, beloved friends, as we move toward the close of the way of transformation, we again bring the arrow back to point at ourselves, to point at the depth of the mind and to learn to observe it. Take the list of questions that we have offered unto you and simply repeat that process on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Jaquelyn. That was lovely and clear and a lot of stuff. Good stuff. it's so hard when I do homilies, in that in order to do the announcements in a timely manner about what's coming, we try and set a description and choose the reading and do all that stuff like by Thursday. And so often what comes to me on Thursday when I'm doing that changes throughout the rest of the weekend. And so on Sunday, it all comes to me so differently. And it looks different than even the notes that I have put down. So it's always, we'll just see. That's kind of why Nona's saying it perfectly. When I reach the place I'm going, I'll know my way then. When I get there, I'll look back and see what had happened. So initially, the homily was, and it still will be, about reflection. I think this time of year, it's very natural for us to review what has gone on before and kind of take some reflection and regroup and set some goals for the coming year. And this has been a process for me. Comes around every year, and I spend some time doing that. So I have had some reflection on goal setting recently, and we often spend a lot of time at work this time of year talking about goals. We have professional goals and company goals and financial goals and a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. And so I was kind of taking a look at my process in New Year's resolutions and was reminded early on, I think, I don't know, from about the age of 14, I had two main New Year's resolutions that came around every year. And starting at 14, it was weight. And I've been dealing with that my entire life. So it was either weight or quitting smoking. About the time in my early adulthood, when I was smoking, it was always, that was going to be the one I was going to let go of. So every year they would come about. And I was looking at both those goals at that period of time in my life when I began to set those, and they stayed with me, like I said, for many years. On the surface, they seemed very lofty, I guess, when I would set them and when I would talk about them and when I would try and affirm them that I will manage this issue and take care of this, whether it's going to be 20 pounds or the quitting smoking or whatever. And so they seemed like they were for health purposes. And as I looked kind of beneath them, there was two of them that I looked at recently. So the first one being underneath that weight, looking at why I wanted to lose weight. And so seemed like it'd be good and healthy to not carry around the extra weight. And looked a little bit deeper and saw that it was more about avoiding suffering than being healthy. So it was wanting to avoid the consequences that would come as a result of being heavy. And then if I even went deeper than that, it was nothing, it was much more about vanity and acceptance socially. it tapped a lot of fear if I didn't meet the goal. And so it was all surrounded around the fear of not getting something accomplished. The smoking goal was the same. It started out being, healthy. I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to feel better. I wanted to avoid, and then I looked deeper, and it's more about avoiding the consequences of of being a smoker and what that would entail. And then when I looked beneath that, even that wasn't very honest. Even that was kind of trying to manipulate motive, so it sounded better to me. And even the smoking issue was much more about social acceptance. And at the time when I was, younger, all the people I was around smoked. I mean, we just kind of grew up doing that. But towards the end, a lot of them, towards the end of my smoking, a lot of my friends and the people around me had put cigarettes down, and I had not. And so it was once again much more about fitting in, about how it looked, about this image that's talked about in the reading, that those were my primary motivations. Once again, it was about avoiding something unpleasant, as opposed to embracing something that I truly wanted. And so, like I said, this has been going on and on and on and on. So my goal setting skills have not been very good. The funny thing is, putting the time and energy into these goals. So I finally get caught up. So 2015, I finally put down the cigarettes. And how that came about was just finally, it was just, if you're going to quit smoking, you just have to quit smoking. And so I put the cigarettes down. As a result of that, and one of the fears of quitting smoking was the weight gain. And so being very susceptible to that, I put cigarettes down and I put on 50 pounds. And that was back in 2015. So in 2017, I finally found a good meal plan that helped me lose some weight. So I took off about 40 pounds at that point in time. And it was nice to have that particular piece gone. And then what's funny about goals is that so I finally get rid of this weight. And then in 2017, I was diagnosed with having some breast cancer. So I had to have some surgery, and then I had to go on a medication that had weight gain as a side effect. And I was just susceptible enough to believe it. So I have put on probably half of that weight that I had lost. So seeing how part of this process for me was seeing about how when goals are at that very superficial level, they conflict. They're always conflicting. And that's why the feeling of being on a hamster wheel is so prevalent, that it's not exactly set in what I would really truly want to set a goal for. And then the other, I was thinking about this yesterday, always trying to, worry about the work on the weight issue. At age 55, the suggestion for me, for my doctor with this cancer thing and this med, is just to walk, that's the best exercise. So 3 miles a day is the suggested walk. So, and then increase water. And so I drink the water all day. I don't know how, it's like some 120 ounces of water I'm supposed to drink, right? So I drink all this water, and then I set out on this 3 mile walk, and I have discovered that I need to put potty breaks in along this 3 mile route, whichever I'm doing, because I have intaked all this water and now I'm supposed to walk, and I have gotten into some trouble along those lines. So looking at the conflicting goals, it showed up like that on that particular occasion, but I find that happening all the time as I look at goals, that one does not support the other. So what I landed on, when I landed on this particular reading, was the idea of, what if this truly, in a very honest way, could become my goal, to discover this inner silence, to find a way to really look honestly at what gets in the way of my aspirations, my spiritual aspirations, because it's really, this last year has really been a challenge. I'm very grateful for being a part of Awakening Together. I learned so much from the teachers here, from the people in my gentle healing classes, amazing. The literature, I do the work, I do the reading, I do the journaling, but I am so easily distracted that I sometimes question whether or not I have what it takes this round in this life to really find my spot, my place in this kind of silence. And so part of the journey for me is really realizing that the answer for me is continuing to look. I'm so fatigued of looking at this ego stuff, but it does not seem to be possible to get past it without continuously looking at it. And there was something about the way it was put in here. Therefore, understand that in the way of transformation, although we have covered much territory in these lessons so far, a cornerstone of the universal curriculum must always be the cultivation of a deep honesty. In self-honesty, one decides to simply observe the mind itself, to simply observe the behavior that flows from the mind through the body as it gestures itself out into the world. True self-honesty requires time. Why? Because the ego is the attempt to replace honesty and truth with dishonesty and falsity. So I finally, I kind of recognized that the majority, truly the majority of the thinking mind, and I've heard this often, and certainly in Gentle Healing this year, we've talked a lot about the thinking mind and the chatter and the dependence upon it. That's exactly what this is it is simply an attempt to replace honesty and truth with dishonesty and falsity. So to reside in this idea of silence, to reside in quiet, to reside in truth, is simply a matter of continuing to be able to watch the false in mind, in thought, in emotion, in behavior, watch the false and embrace the quiet and the silence, which holds the truth. And continue to take a look at the stuff that gets in the way. So the questions in self-honesty, being able to ask the question, have I ever had a murderous thought? Have I ever manipulated another mind in order to gain what I believe I needed? Have I ever withdrawn love for subtle reason of causing hurt? So these questions, as you go through them, and then it asks, to notice what happens within the body as you answer the questions. And for me, anytime I'm trying to answer these kinds of questions honestly, it brings up the guilt. If I've had these kinds of thoughts, if I hold thoughts that I don't believe are spiritual, if I am judging my husband or judging myself or, fearing things, all that stuff that I think I should be beyond and really realize that I am not even started. So being willing to ask the question, answer the question, see the guilt that arises as a result of my answer, and be willing to love it anyway, to allow it anyway, even though I don't believe it is, quote, spiritual, or it is the way it should be. For any of those reasons, when I hang on to it, and the guilt makes it more attractive, have more Velcro. And so I seem to end up repeating the belief of that. So decide for silence, decide for peace, for healing occurs to the depth and degree that the mind is willing to embrace what occurs within it. That is all that occurs within it. Denial causes separation. So I think, and I can't quite articulate a lot of the stuff that I read, but what this is saying is that all of our thinking causes separation. All of our thinking, the thinking mind, is denial. The engaging the thinking mind, relying on the thinking mind, investing time and energy in the thinking mind is a form of denial that causes the separation. Causes separation, self from self, self from others, self from God. So if we're trying to use this thinking mind to bring ourselves to peace, it can't possibly work because it is not designed to do that. It is actually designed to keep us from that. So, and then towards the end of the reading, the mind in conflict with itself is dangerous to itself and, of course, by extension, to everyone else in all dimensions. Therefore, indeed, beloved friends, beware of those who come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. I remember the first time I read that, I was pretty sure that the ravenous wolves in sheep clothing was you or the other people in my life. It took me a while and a few times to read this to recognize that we are looking at sheep's clothing is what the ego does with our own stuff and our own thoughts. Tries to make them quote spiritual, tries to make them acceptable, tries to make them benign, when in reality, kind of like looking at the different layers of goals, the different layers of motives under goals. It really, that's what we're trying to look at. We're trying to look at the reality of the idea that's underneath the wolf. Learn to cultivate self-honesty. Though it sounds like a simple thing, this does take time, simply because the mind has used its own power to be in denial about its own miscreations. It does not want to own them. I think that's pretty important. It does not want to embrace them. It wants very much for you and itself to believe that it is really a very high spiritual being, which is the challenge that probably the spiritual ego that I have struggled with most in the last couple years really does fall into those traps of not wanting to really look at what the truth is. Below the image that I try and present. So the suggestion is to go through that process of being able to ask yourself those kinds of questions. Those hard show up for you because it's going to be a little bit different for everybody else, but how they show up. And I think as I read this section a few times, initially it sounded kind of harsh. I think the call to be honest at times appears a little bit to be like beating ourselves up. Which is why we have to learn to do that without the judgment. We have to cultivate some charity for ourselves, cultivate some gentleness and compassion as we're trying to walk this path. I really have a hard time as I study and as I read. Things will come to me that I have such a hard time, and I've said this before, articulating. And then I have extreme anxiety about being in front of you guys. And so my mouth is so dry, I need to take a drink. That everything that's within me that I want to share, I can't get out right. I apologize for this. I don't know, all this emotion coming up because of the fear I have for doing this. And I have really tried to white knuckle my way through. So the most honest thing I can say right now is I feel so unworthy being here in front of you. But I also feel loved and accepted, and so that's great. But I do think I'm going to step back a little bit just from doing the Sunday gatherings for a little bit. And so this kind of stuff doesn't happen again, at least for a while. And I will work on my own healing, and then I can come back to you from a different place. And I apologize. I don't know how this stuff works. But apparently this is how it's supposed to work for me today. And thank you, Dawn. Appreciate that. Yes, and donations, absolutely. We have some time for some sharing, and thank you for the love in your messages. That was beautiful. So if anybody else would like to pop in, we have a little bit of time before playing a closing song. Feel free to take the mic. Anybody?
I'll take the mic.
Thank you.
So I just really enjoyed this. I feel like it just takes me back to a place of just continuing to look. You know, I kind of like the statement about the wolf in sheep's clothing, because I had that experience so many times when I'm looking at my intention or looking at my of what I'm really wanting, you know, versus what I'm saying I'm wanting. So it was just a reminder to do that, and to also, as I look, to not judge, but as you said, to really embrace, you know, what I see or whatever it is that is coming up. And so this was very helpful for me. I just also want to, excuse me, my husband's vacuuming. Hold on. And pardon me. But I also just wanted to say that I so enjoy your homilies, your clarity, your vulnerability, just the authenticity of it just touches my heart. I'm always resonating just exactly where you are, you know, even in this moment, where you're feeling the need to go within, you know, I resonate with that too. And as I'm sure we're all in, you know, in some space or place in us, we know that place and space. And no matter what things will look like, I feel like a wreck when I'm doing a weekly gathering. Believe it or not, I think some of us may all feel that piece of unworthiness that comes up and like, I don't know what I'm doing, but here I go. So do whatever you need to do, but you're loved and you are appreciated.
Thank you, sweet Beverly. I'm muted. All right. Thank you all. Reminder that we have the fellowship starting at 9:30. Love you. Have a great day. I will see you here again in some fashion. Thank you.
You've been watching our online gathering. It happens weekly on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. To join us live in the sanctuary, visit our website, awakening-together.org. You'll want to click on Online Sanctuary in the main menu, and then in the drop-down menu, look for How to Enter the Sanctuary. Right there at the top of the page is a clickable link. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary and join with you in fellowship. Thank you again for watching. Also, please know that if you'd like to stay connected via the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. We hope to see you in the sanctuary.